Hello. Some people who know me personally know that I had the very unpleasant, unhappy experience of living in the state of Alabama for many years. And that's a long story, but Alabama is absolutely one of the most backward states in the entire United States. And in many places, it's one of the worst places you could possibly live. Right-wing extremist politics, poverty everywhere, just an incredibly backward place to live. Well, Alabama has been in the news again a little bit lately, and not for a good reason. Alabama's not usually in the news for a good reason. It's usually in the news for a bad reason, and so it's been in the news for a bad reason again here lately. Roy Moore, the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, was just suspended from office for the rest of his term the other day because he chose to defy the United States Supreme Court's order on gay marriage, which came down in the summer of 2015. And this is not the first time that Moore has been kicked out of office. In fact, he has a long history of defying superior courts, defying superior authority, because he has a very extreme position on states' rights. He seems to feel that state constitutions and state laws, in many cases, sort of trump the U.S. Constitution and federal law. Moore started out as a circuit judge in Etowah County, Alabama, and that was a county that I lived in for a very long time. Not proud of it. Living in Etowah County is, I don't think, necessarily anything to be particularly proud of. It's where the city of Gadsden is, which was a steel and rubber town for many, many years, and then, of course, they lost the steel industry, and rubber continues to be big, but it can't provide near enough jobs for the people in that county, and so it's just an impoverished area with a lot of haves and have-nots. And Judge Roy Moore was from this area. He was from an isolated valley near a community called Gallant, and it was sort of a rural, isolated place in certain ways, except for economic commercial activity. It's sort of a community to itself. Further on down the road, there's a little post office, there's a couple of gas stations, there's an elementary school, there's a water authority, and I think there's a conservation lake or something like that, and not much else. And it's an extremely countrified place where people in the neighborhood often get together for apparently these music hoedowns, I guess you would call them, on Friday and Saturday night. One person told me that area is almost a world unto itself, and it's an extremely right-wing states' rights sort of area. Well, Moore became a circuit judge in Etowah County, Alabama, and he decided to post a plaque of the Ten Commandments in his courtroom. And this offended some people, and so they sought to challenge this posting of the Ten Commandments in court. And it was a huge issue for a long time. Alabama at that time had a right-wing extremist governor named Fob James, saying that James said that if anybody tried to forcibly remove the Ten Commandments plaque from Judge Moore's courtroom, that he would have the state troopers and the National Guard surround the courthouse and prevent any such action. And what happened with a federal case involving this Ten Commandments plaque was some people did try to sue to have it removed, but then there was this ruling that they didn't have any standing to sue because they'd never been personally hurt or personally offended by it, because they'd never been in any kind of a legal case in Judge Moore's court. And so there was this problem with people not being able to do anything about this Ten Commandments plaque because of not having standing to sue, not actually being a victim who could file a lawsuit. So this Ten Commandments in the courtroom issue rocked on for a while, and it got media attention and all that. And somewhere in the coverage of all this, it was reported that when people had cases before Judge Moore, that he would actually ask them about their church affiliation in court. Now, I don't know what Judge Moore was thinking to be asking people those kind of questions, because he certainly could have subjected himself and the state of Alabama to a major lawsuit if it were ever proved and challenged that he was favoring people based on their religious affiliation. I'm not sure why that happened. I don't think it ever did. But in any case, this whole battle over the Ten Commandments propelled Moore into the office of the state the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, and he was elected to that office in 2000, the same year that George Bush was sort of elected President of the United States. But that's the year that Roy Moore became the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. And he always made a big deal about how Christian leaders had a responsibility to acknowledge God. Now, I don't know why he thinks it's a problem, because judges and lawyers do acknowledge God all the time on a regular basis. It even happens in the United States Supreme Court. So I'm not sure why he was making such a huge issue, but he had constructed this huge monument to the Ten Commandments and had that placed in a prominent place in the state judicial building. You notice I said state judicial building. They only have one in Alabama. The Supreme Court and the Court of Civil Appeals and the Court of Criminal Appeals, they all meet in one building, so it's not just the Supreme Court building, but it's the state judicial building. So he has this huge monument placed in the lobby, and people objected to that, saying it was basically a government endorsement of religion, and there was a federal case. It went to federal court. A federal judge ordered this monument to be removed because it was basically an endorsement of a particular religion, the Christian religion. And so a federal judge ordered it removed. Moore did not comply, and so the judge had to take action through the U.S. Marshals to get a contractor to go in and actually forcibly remove this monument from the state judicial building. And this received national press coverage all over the place. The fact that this Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court was defying the federal courts. And to some people, for a while, it looked like he was getting away with it. And people have some funny ideas about how authority works in the United States, in the U.S. system. Is the U.S. system the best in the world? I don't necessarily think that it is. I think there is an abundance of reasons to say that the political system in the United States may well be one of the worst in the world. When you look at what's happening in the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But there was this Christian radio station in Birmingham, a conservative Christian radio station, because most stations that play contemporary Christian music, and there's some great music there, but the people involved with Christian radio tend to be politically conservative. There is, of course, the Crawford Group, and they're an extremely conservative, ostensibly Christian company, and they operate radio stations all over the various areas of the United States, and they are extremely conservative politically. And so one of the announcers was saying, okay, in spite of all this federal action, it's up to time for President Bush. President Bush needs to get involved and say that monument's not going anywhere. And of course, President Bush, nor any other president, does not actually have the constitutional authority to do that. And that's just how little conservatives know about the political and legal systems in the United States. They fuss and fight about the Constitution all the time, but they haven't actually read the Constitution. They don't seem to actually know what it says, and they don't seem to understand that the U.S. Supreme Court is the organ of authority it's the Supreme Court that interprets the U.S. Constitution and interprets U.S. laws. So this Ten Commandments monument was forcibly removed from the state judicial building on the order of a federal judge. So then somebody files an ethics complaint with the State Ethics Commission, I believe it was, and then that complaint goes to the Court of the Judiciary. You see, in cases involving lawyers and sitting judges, there's this special court that is in charge of firing judges, disciplining judges, and they hold trials. This special court called the Court of the Judiciary, and they are the people who hear complaints on judges that they're abusing their office or ignoring the law or something like that, and it's their responsibility to discipline, censure, suspend, reprimand, and even remove judges from office. And I think almost all states have this kind of a setup, and it's pretty obvious that these courts of the judiciary probably don't do very much, do they? But once in a while they will. And Moore was tried by this state court of the judiciary, and they decided that he had violated the canons of judicial ethics, and by a unanimous vote voted to remove him from office. So then he appeals to the state Supreme Court. Well, the setup is such that the state Supreme Court can't hear cases involving its own members, so the governor of Alabama at the time, Bob Riley, appointed a special Supreme Court. That's the constitutional revision. This special Supreme Court heard the case, and then they ordered Moore right out of office. And apparently Moore didn't learn a damn thing. He tried to run for governor, didn't make that, but ran for Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court again in 2012, and apparently neither Moore nor the people of Alabama learned a lesson, because then he gets up there and opposes the federal court rulings on gay marriage. And from the time that first ruling came down from the federal district judge at court in Mobile onward, he was very active in opposing what was happening in the federal judiciary. So finally, in the summer of 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court legalizes gay marriage all over the United States. Then Judge Moore issues this order informing state probate judges that they are still bound by Alabama laws that prohibit gay marriage. He tells them they are still bound by state law and the state constitution and the state Supreme Court, in spite of what the U.S. Supreme Court has done. Well, it took the familiar track. A complaint was filed with the State Judicial Inquiry Commission. They took the complaint to the state's Court of the Judiciary, and the Court of the Judiciary suspended Moore for the rest of his term. They didn't remove him outright. They didn't take his title away, because, believe it or not, in spite of this open defiance of the U.S. Supreme Court, there were apparently a judge or two on this panel who did not agree with removing him from office. So that the most that they could do was suspend him without pay for the rest of his term while he continues to hold the title, which is kind of ridiculous because it effectively is a removal. So now the situation they have in Alabama is Moore is going to appeal again to the state Supreme Court, and the current governor, Robert Bentley, who was involved in an impeachment scandal himself, will have to appoint a special Supreme Court again, and Moore's probably going to be kicked out of office again for the rest of his life, because next time he'll be too old to run for a position of Chief Justice or any other justice on the Supreme Court. So the case of Roy Moore, it's one of these situations where one of these states' rights activists refuses to learn his lesson, didn't know that the North won the Civil War, didn't know that there was Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, Brown versus Board of Education or something like that, continues to believe in this notion of states' rights, and he didn't learn a damn thing. Now, Alabama may be rid of Roy Moore, but will that help anything in the state of Alabama? Hell no, because they're going to continue to elect these extremist, conservative, states' rights people. And in terms of cosmetics, they may be getting rid of Roy Moore, but it's cosmetic only. And Alabama will continue to be what it has always been. It's always been a poor state. It will continue to be a poor state because it pursues some of the most regressive public policies you find anywhere in the United States. That same red state America. So red state America will continue to be red state America. The South will continue to be the poorest region. May be rid of this charlatan Roy Moore, but in the end, it's not going to improve things very much in the heart of Dixie. So my advice to people living in the heart of Dixie that want a better life, I think you better get the hell out of there, because there's not a lot happening that's going to make things better there, in spite of the fact that the saga of Roy Moore seems to be over, because when you lose one guy like Moore, you get about 24 more to take his place. But at least with regard to Roy Moore, the saga may be coming to an end, and that's one thing that everybody all across America can sort of be glad about. And that's my take on the saga of Roy Moore, the Ten Commandments judge. Have a good day.